I rewrote it in a day and a half, basically put it out, and we increased conversions by 80%, like overnight.
There is one product, Christian Hudson's, or
oh yeah. I know
there's a how to what is it? Girlfriend activation system.
Yeah,
that was that in 2012. I followed that niche so much.
That was a good offer.
Yeah, it was different.
I think they still promote that.
Yeah. No, they're still promoting, and it's actually the one offer that was very different from all the others.
Yep.
And I'm curious to know, in your opinion, what is it? Why do men, for example, we're talking about copy, but we're going into this men and women relationship.
Oh, dude, I can talk about this. I can talk about this stuff all day. You would be surprised how many men in our industry call me for dating advice, by the way.
Well, no, I wouldn't be, actually, because I think a lot of them need it.
They do.
As a woman
really
in
do.
the industry, I sometimes I've
Especially
been
these
at
really
the other
rich
end.
guys, right? Yeah. The really rich guys who are like, I'm really rich, but I can't find a girlfriend. I'm like, yeah, because all these women know you're rich and you're not doing anything else to make yourself interesting. But
yeah, but what do you think? Like, what speaks to men as a product? Like, because you've spoken to men and you've spoken to women. What's a product that speaks to men that, like for me as a woman, when I saw those products, like, hey, learn how to fuck her, or like whatever, I was like, why would anybody like looking for anything as a relationship want to buy this type of product? And who are these 3 women on this planet that would go for a guy that's like looking for this type of product?
Well, a lot of it to me goes back to like evolutionary psychology. Same thing with like when I'm doing women's offers, the things that work are the things that have worked 100 years ago.
Okay.
It's not, I had somebody telling me, I have this video that's on YouTube that people watch. There's a couple 100,000 views on it, and people write me on Facebook and say, oh, dude, I watched your video. It's from when I was at Zentrepreneur years ago. And I gave this thing called 8 stupid tricks of copywriting or something like that. And in it, I gave a lot of examples about like, how to get men and women emotionally involved. And I had written a letter at the time called Power for Home that was a ClickBank #1 for like 2 years or something like that. Yeah. And my client, Chris Fox, when he came to me, he had this letter, it was doing okay. And he offered me a piece of the offer, a small percentage of the offer in exchange for rewriting it. I rewrote it in a day and a half, basically put it out, and we increased conversions by 80%, like overnight, basically, right?
Wow.
And the way I did that was by making it about a story. Like it went from being about, here's how you can save money on your power, to about a guy who was protecting his family, basically, like protecting his family from being at the mercy of the power companies and America's crumbling power grid and all that stuff. And there's a line in there where the story starts, where it goes something along the lines of like, if you're a man or even just have a heart, I know you can imagine the terror and the shame that I felt when my beautiful 5-year-old daughter walked into the room, her lips almost blue, and said, Daddy, I'm cold. Right?
Oh boy.
Like, and the guy, the electrician we're talking about was like 50, he has kids. I wasn't 50. I don't have kids even now. But for guys, that primal feeling of wanting to protect your family and protect the women in your life, protect the people in your life is just there, right? From an evolutionary psychology standpoint, it's just there. So, and for women, it's often about being good enough. It's about having the man desire you and only you forever. It's really interesting because like men will say like, I'm a nice guy. Why doesn't she want me? I'm like, women don't want nice guys. That's not what women want. Women want guys who are nice to them. That's the important part. But women want a warrior. They want somebody who, like my wife, likes the fact that I can be an asshole when necessary. If anybody's fucking with her, like it's always funny. She's always like, Chris, honey, I can handle my own stuff. I'm like, cool. And I'm like, cool, baby, that's great. But when I do step over the line, because I get too pissed off at somebody fucking with her in some way, later she's like, I told you not to do that. I'm really mad, but man, that was hot. So I think it's just about like, oh yeah, and the video I was talking about on YouTube, people say like, oh man, what you're talking about with these stories about men like protecting women and doing that's super sexist and whatever, misogynistic. I'm like, no, it's not. It's just what works from a marketing standpoint. Like for me, I'm like, I don't want to live in fantasy land about what works. When you're in marketing, you find out what works because it's your money on the line and you're putting it out there and you see if it converts or not. And what converts for me is really understanding on a very deep level that kind of primal feelings that men and women have.
How do you, you just talked about having a 50-year-old, man, and how do you find these stories? Like the mechanics of it. Do you research like a site in particular? Do you read a lot of magazines? Like what would one have to do to kind of really get into the emotional part of a story? Like,
I think it's just about understanding people more than anything else. I do read a lot. I used to read more, but I read a lot. I read a lot of books about psychology. I read a lot of fiction books. And I've always just been really interested in people. And part of that, I think, is the bipolar thing, right? So when you're bipolar, you feel emotions very, very powerfully. But when you're triggered in some way, when you're hypomanic, you have like no empathy, right? No empathy whatsoever. It's all about you. It's all about you. It's all about you. And when I was in those states, I kind of had to like people almost become kind of alien to you at a certain point. So you have to kind of study them from a remove in a weird sort of way. And I think it gives you more insight into people. I've heard psychopaths do the same thing, but I'm not a psychopath. I have checked many times. But the stories, I mean, I have a bit I do when I give speeches sometimes called "You're Not Special and That's Awesome," right? You're not special. Because a lot of people, they walk around and they're terrified to be vulnerable, and they're terrified to talk about, oh, they have a mental health issue, or they were abused when they were a kid, or they have this horrible, horrible divorce, or they have a spouse who is gaslighting them constantly, or whatever, or they're gay, or whatever all this kind of stuff is. And people are terrified of it. And I remember going to a mastermind a friend of mine did 6 years ago or so. And I was speaking, and I'm kind of known in our industry for like, I don't really do small talk. I'm just not good at it. If I'm going to sit there and talk to somebody, I tend to go pretty deep pretty quickly because that's what I'm personally kind of interested in. And because I'm very open about my own stuff, people are generally very open with me, and they'll tell me things they wouldn't necessarily tell anybody else. And so over the course of like 2 days before I spoke, I talked to pretty much everybody, 30 people at this mastermind, got to know them. It was a good time. I went up and spoke. And during that, I was like, listen, there's people in this room, I know, we're abused as kids. There's people in this room who have gone through all these horrible things, had these diseases, had this other stuff. You're surrounded by people who went through the same fucking thing, right? The same fucking thing, or something very, very similar. And so the way I kind of wrote copy, we talked about my own tragedies before, right? The things that I've gone through. I just take the emotions that I have from all of that stuff and think about, okay, if I was a 50-year-old man who had a daughter who was really cold, what would that feel like to me? I also have a little bit of an acting background, so I'm sure that's part of it as well. Yeah. But, you have the emotions in you, you have the insecurities, you have the fears. Nobody is as cool as they seem to be when you see them on stage or anything like that. Everybody's faking it. Everybody is full of self-doubt. Everybody in our industry, this, has the imposter complex up the wazoo, except for the sociopaths like Jordan Belfort, but the rest of them do. And I think it's just about like getting to know yourself and getting to know people and to love people the way they are. I used to always say like, worship reality. Right. For me, some people will say that I'm cynical. I don't think I'm cynical at all. I just try to see the world with as many clear eyes as I can, with the most wide open, clear eyes as I can. Sometimes that just means I look at things and say, wow, we're kind of fucked as a species, because we are. I don't think that's cynical or even pessimistic. I just think it's kind of true at this point.
Hope you found today's session valuable. If you have any questions for me or just want to connect, please feel free to visit my website, mariasparagis.com. That's MariaSparagis.com. I'd love to hear what you're working on, so drop me a line on any hot button issues your business is experiencing. And remember, don't worry about failure. You only have to be right once.